There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's on the gridiron,
for the end zone, it's Jefferson who's got the touchdown.
On the court,
Edwards thinking three, and popping a three.
On the ice,
It's Kaprizov with an open net, he scores.
Or on the diamond.
Buxton hammers that to left field. Another Minnesota home run.
Whether it's positive,
I think this is a good enough roster to make the playoffs.
Or negative.
He's terrible, awful. Don't get it, don't understand it.
Whether there's optimism,
Hey, they might be able to even make it to a conference final.
or pessimism.
Don't expect me to be super excited. I mean, I don't know. Does this really do much for anybody?
There's always something to chat about.
Shout out to Minnesota Sports Chat. Keep on being elite.
If you're looking for fun, informative discussion on all things Minnesota sports, you've come to the right place. This is Minnesota Sports Chat. And now, here's your host, Ross Brendel.
I don't remember what I was so worked up about for who was brutal and awful in that soundbite. I think that might be Matt Shoemaker or Jay Happ. Could have been Dylan Bundy or Chris Archer. I'm not positive, but I think it was Matt Shoemaker. This is edition number 120 of the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat. Yeah, you know the drill by now. Award-winning, if only in my own mind. Welcome to all of those of you. Welcome to those of you that are listening in the Score North Taxi Squad feed. Welcome to the fun that is Minnesota Sports Chat. And a big thank you to those who have subscribed on the Minnesota Sports Chat feed. Maybe you've rated and reviewed already. Thank you so much for that. If you've yet to do so, please do so. It's a great way for me to spread the word and get to the masses. Minnesota Sports Chat. You can rate and review on Apple and on Spotify. Today's guest is a returning guest, an Amazon best-selling author. He is the author of History of Heartbreak, 100 Events That Tortured Minnesota Sports Fans, and the brand new book, A Slap Shot in Time, The Wild But True History of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. He is none other than Dan Wienesota. Mr. Wienesota, welcome back to Minnesota Sports Chat.
Well, thanks for having me back. I must not have embarrassed myself enough the first time, huh?
No, you did just fine. It's funny, though, the title of your first book, I guess, would it be subtitle 100 Events That Tortured Minnesota Sports Fans? I don't know if you did that by design, but it actually kind of hurt to read that because I was starting to think back of some of the moments just in my life that have tortured me. But we did talk about that book in this feed probably roughly a year ago, so you can scroll back and find that. I want to spend a good chunk of our time together on your latest book, very new within the last handful of days, this book on the Fighting Saints.
Yeah, we released last Thursday.
Okay. Yeah. So there we go. Within the last handful of days. And again, Dan, I've only had a chance to skim it. Thanks to you for giving me a copy to go through. I read a few chapters last night. And what I loved about going through the book last night, Dan, is the history that's in this book. And one thing that surprised me a little bit was not just history of the Fighting Saints, but history of hockey in Minnesota. So I got to imagine that was pretty fun for you to go through that history, but I imagine you must have learned some stuff yourself as well.
Well, it's always fun for me to go down these little rabbit holes and find as much little information and nuggets that I can. But, part of this one was not so much just the history of Minnesota hockey, but part of our claim here in this book is, that hockey, organized hockey, originated in St. Paul. And St. Paul not having a major hockey team is kind of a big theme throughout. And we talk about how when the North Stars were formed, at one point there was a little bit of a deal where those St. Paul and Minneapolis groups had struck a bargain to have that NHL team play at the St. Paul Auditorium and then eventually expand it. But when they presented that idea to the NHL Board of Governors, they were kind of like, yeah, no, we want a new arena. So they went back out, took a recess, came back in with the plans to build at Met Center. And so St. Paul kind of got hosed out of that a little bit. And 3 months after the North Stars' first season started, well, the Civic Center. Plans for the Civic Center were approved by the St. Paul City Councils and all those things, and that kind of started this whole pathway. So it's kind of more or less just kind of setting this up as St. Paul's story as opposed to the other Minnesota teams that played across the river, you know.
I think what's really interesting here, Dan, is I think going back to the last time I talked to you on History of Heartbreak, I think you brought up this same fact, and I hadn't known that. So at the time you were doing the first book, was the seed already kind of planted in your head that this might be a second adventure, if you will, that you would tackle? Or did this just kind of come out of nowhere in recent memory? Because it's a little telling to me and kind of cool that same fact that I'm pretty sure you brought up to me the last time I interviewed you, you've been able to elaborate on this time around. So was it already spinning in your head to take this project on?
Actually, it wasn't. After the first book, I didn't want to write a second book. You got to remember, I'm my family's from St. Paul, and I'm an East Side kid. I know a lot of you guys are all West Side people. So, we grew up with the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and we grew up with like going to, pick up Dad downtown St. Paul where he worked. So, I mean, that's just kind of my whole background. But this project actually started from a colleague of yours, Judd Zulgad had passed during the pandemic. We were all looking for things. Excuse me. Sorry. We were all looking for things to watch, and Judd had posted something about the California Golden Seals documentary on Apple. And I was like, man, I got to watch that. That sounds really good. And as I'm watching it and watching all this hockey history, because you remember the Seals came in the league at the same time as the North Stars did. I'm like, why isn't there a North Stars documentary? Being a North Stars fan growing up and loving the North Stars and being heartbroken when they left, I'm just like, why isn't there? And you know what? Why don't I just make like, my documentaries aren't, like professional 30 for 30s or anything, but they're fun little amateur documentaries on YouTube. I'm like, I'm sitting here all summer. Why don't I do this? Right. Well, you can't really tell the story of the North Stars in the 70s without coming across the story of the WHA and the Minnesota Fighting Saints. And because they competed for players and they competed for fans and they competed for dollars, and they were going head to head on certain nights and things like that, and just kind of stumbling. I mean, I guess I grew up hearing about them and knowing about them, but reading all these old stories, you're just like, oh my goodness, they're just, this is the Wild West. These stories are amazing, and they needed their own story, because too many times when people tell their story, it's as, well, here's this hockey book about Minnesota and the North Stars. Oh, by the way, there was the Fighting Saints over here. And I actually had a publisher say that to me. He's like, let's do this whole hockey book. And I'm like, no, these guys need their own story. Their story needs to be told separate from everything else.
Well, I love I don't even want to use the term footnote, but I love the spot in history that they hold. And it's fascinating to hear you talk about they were competing for players. Think about how nuts that sounds in today's day and age in any sport. We have the major professional sports here in this country, and there really isn't another league outside of, I guess, if you want to count the WWE and AEW, that maybe compete for the same professional wrestlers. But right now, currently, the NHL, the NBA.
Look at Live Golf.
Correct. Those are, and I was just going to get there, and that's a great point too. That's about it. But the 4-5 major team sports, I guess, even if you want to count the MLS, they don't have that competition. So it's kind of fascinating for me to put myself in that time frame of, okay, am I supporting both teams, or do I like one over the other? I find that part, to me, that's, in a weird way, I wish I could be a part of that.
Right.
I guess the only current comparison now is if you got a couple cities where you could pick your team, right? If you live in New York, maybe you're a Yankees or a Mets fan, Jets or Giants, Cubs or White Sox. I get that. But for the rest of us, to have a competing team or a competing league, it's incredible and fascinating to think about.
Yeah. And they started the league as with the intention of merging, because it was started by the same people who started the ABA, and they had successfully negotiated that merger with the NBA as well. So these guys started this as with that goal in mind, and they were throwing money around just like that Live Golf is right now. They were throwing money around to draw players away from the NHL.
Here's one that I saw last night, Dan. And again, we're talking to Dan Wenisota. You can find him on Twitter at Wenisota. We are talking about a slap shot in time, the wild but true history of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. You can find it on Amazon in print and in Kindle edition. I'm skimming through the book last night, and one of the chapters that I read, it came across a time in history. It's particular, I think it was mid-70s. St. Paul Mayor Larry Cohen, he's in the crowd during one of the games, and there's a bit of a melee that breaks out. And he says, my God, these guys are animals. One of the animals on that roster, by the way, was future Minnesota Wild head coach Bruce Boudreau. So that alone is a great factoid. But what about the Fighting Saints led them to be called animals by a current sitting mayor?
So, remind me to get back to the Boudreau thing, because I got a few things for you there. But the animals thing happened in Mankato. So this was like I think their fourth season. And, they were trying to get improved ticket sales in their finances. So they were doing some of their exhibition games more outstate instead of downtown St. Paul to kind of get a bigger fan base. And they went down to Mankato and they held an inter squad scrimmage with kind of their starters and their minor league team, the Johnstown Jets, which, became the Charlestown Chiefs in the movie. But anyways, so they're holding this scrimmage. And by the way, this is a fundraiser for youth hockey. Okay. Well, the whole melee starts with Steve Carlson, one of the Carlson brothers, skated into the corner and ran into Mike Shaky Walton. Everybody called him Shaky. And Shaky's like the team's leading scorer. He's the Kirill Kaprizov, so to speak, and they kind of get into it a little bit. And Jack Carlson, who is Steve's brother, and Jack is a big dude, and they say his hands were like meat hooks. He skates in to defend his brother and starts getting into it with Walton. And he says, listen, Shaky, you don't want to do this. And Walton says, yeah, I do. And Jack's like, no, you don't. And he says, yeah, I do. So Jack laid one into him, busted his nose. I think Walton described it as his nose was on the other side of his face. And this extreme brawl breaks out. Once they get that cleaned up, John Arbor, I think, took his stick and shoved it into Gary Gambucci's stomach. And then these two start going at it. And Arbor's ejected, and I not safe for work here, but he flipped off the crowd on his way out. This is a home crowd, right? And this whole thing was a fundraiser for youth hockey. And that's what the mayor was watching this and just going, whoa, what is going on here?
That to me is incredible. I mentioned WWE and AEW. That sounds like something you might see if you're watching like Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown. Dan, how many different interviews did you conduct for this project? I know I saw you tweeting often about people that you were talking to. This had to take a lot of different interviews and people, but also just the time involved in something like this.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't conduct that many because a few of the players, I think, because I'm not media like you guys, I'm just this 7th grade science teacher. So I think sometimes they're afraid to, like, who's this guy, right? I talked with Lefty Curran, who was the goalie for the team, and he's just a blast. He's he calls me during the day when I'm teaching to tell me stories, and we have a really great relationship.
I love that.
I talked with the PR guy, Mike Lamy, who was sitting on all the team's photos, original photos, and the franchise certificate, and some other team personnel. A couple of the players were willing to talk to me on Twitter a little bit. Steve Carlson, I conversed with a little bit off kind of in messages, and he gave me some information specifically about that Mankato thing, and just a couple other players offline. Not too many, though.
I want to talk a little bit, spend hopefully a little bit of time here on the Slapshot connection, just about how Slapshot came to be. And it's kind of funny that there are actually still a good amount of people, I think, in this great state of Minnesota that don't really know that there's any sort of connection until they maybe watch the movie for the first time. Like, it takes some explaining to to the novice. But this is another. Minnesota has an interesting part in theatrical movie sports history when you talk about all that's been done here. And I know I'll miss a few and this will show my age, but you had the 3 Mighty Ducks movies, Little Big League, Major League 3, which was a farce, I think was partially here. Slapshot. I guess Miracle too. That was a true story, but obviously
right.
there's the Miracle connection. And I know I'm missing more, but perhaps the very first one and the most iconic Minnesota sports movie, and maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, would be Slapshot.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, though, I think there was one called Ice Castles that was filmed at Met Center. I'm sure it was terrible. I've never seen it, but just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Johnstown Jets were the Minnesota Fighting Saints. Their minor league team. They were affiliated with us. So, and we had a lot of players that had 2-way contracts that would go down to Johnstown and then come back up. And here's the thing with those minor league teams in the 70s, those players had to be tough and they had to fight and they had to prove that they could handle that kind of thing, because that was the blueprint for most NHL teams. The Philadelphia Broad Street Bullies had kind of laid that blueprint down, and all these players, they had to prove this. So this was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and all these things you've seen in that movie, they really happened in true events. Like there's one where the Carlson brothers get arrested and they get taken out in handcuffs, and Harry Neal, the coach of the Fighting Saints, is there watching the team that night, and he has to go bail them out. Like he has to go get them out of jail after the game. But they filmed it all at that arena. You mentioned Bruce Boudreau. Bruce Boudreau was in the film as well. A lot of the players were in the film. Boudreau played like an opposing player, the Hyannisport team. I think they were green and yellow. He's pretty easy to spot in the movie. His apartment played a big role in the film. Apparently, according to him, the director came up to him and said, "All right, I need a rundown, just ragged, rat-infested apartment. Which one of you guys has the worst place to live?" Because they needed a place to shoot Reg Dunlop's house where he lived, right? Paul Newman's character. And apparently, according to Bruce, everybody on the team pointed at him. So his apartment is that apartment that Reg Dunlop lives in that scene, or house. It may be a house, but that was Bruce Boudreau's apartment.
Even going back, I mean, you go all the way back into the 70s. It's no wonder you could see it back then and you could see it now. Bruce Boudreau has not really changed. He's the same. I mean, he's a character. I mean, he's one of the all-time, not to jump ship too much and talk Minnesota Wild, but one of the greatest disappointments of the Minnesota Wild not being able to go farther and do more is how much more the novice in the state of Minnesota when it comes to hockey, but just in general throughout the country, could have opened up a bit more to Bruce Boudreau. Would have been awesome because he's such a character.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me one bit that he would have the nastiest apartment.
I'm just glad he's landed on his feet because, he's the guy you root for. I mean,
yeah,
we've all seen the little memes of him on the internet swearing, and just you got to love a guy like that. He's just seems like a lot of fun.
One thing that is in this book, well, not just one thing, there's many things, but one that jumped out to me immediately, you have fun facts throughout every chapter. And the fun facts are legitimately fun, just random things. It kind of reminded me of back in the day, if you remember pop-up video on like VH1 or MTV.
Oh, right.
I think it was VH1, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I love that one.
And it would just random things, and I would literally read them and go, huh, that's cool. But what also, just for me, because I'm selfish and it's all about me, one thing that made me laugh is I do this with my family and friends a lot. I will literally just hear something that's funny and random, and I'll just text them and it'll say fun fact. And then a day or two later, somebody on this group will reply and they'll say fun fact. They found something else, right? So this jumped out to me in the book, but I really then wanted to know, how did you decide what goes in those fun fact blurbs? Because in my head, when I hear something, I have a fairly high bar for what gets sent as a fun fact text. So I'm just wondering on your end, what met the qualifications for fun facts to live in book glory from here until the end of time?
Well, I'd like to claim genius, but it's actually a reflection on my poor writing skills. I'm not a writer. I'm a researcher, and it takes a good editor to shape what I put out there. And some of these things I had in there trying to force them into the story, a square peg in a round hole, and it really didn't fit. So my editor, Jesse Pierce, who is amazing, said, maybe we do something with little pull-out facts and just kind of, make a little break and put these little facts in there. And that way you can still, and it's genius. It's absolute genius. And it was totally her idea. So
shameless plug. I'm looking forward to working with Jesse a few times a week on a new Purple Daily podcast venture before we die. So I'm looking forward to that starting next week in the Purple Daily podcast feeds. Okay, you're going to get this question. You're probably going to tell me there is no project, but I got a feeling at some point I'll be talking to you about another book. I don't know what that's going to be, but maybe you do. Do you have anything in your mind, anything that you might want to explore? Because History of Heartbreak, I loved it because, well, one, I love pain, but two, it's just kind of fun to go through and, well, fun's not the right word. I don't even know if fun's the right word, but it's cool to go through and look at all the things that have caused us pain, because it's going to mean that much more when eventually the Twins, Wild, Wolves, Vikings, or even Loons win a championship. Hopefully a couple of them. Once we get one, they'll come in waves.
Right.
Mr. Minnesota. That's my thought. And I just said we. I don't play for any of the teams, but you know what I mean.
No, I don't.
Long story short, what's next? Is there a project you want to tackle? Is there another book? You've kind of established yourself now. Not many people can walk around and introduce themselves as an Amazon best-selling author.
Well,
you can do that now.
Yeah, well, that's first I got to finish this North Stars film. I really bit off a lot with this one. I'm almost done with part 3. And part 4 is the North Stars leaving. So that one's going to be probably just hard mentally for me to get through. But so that's the first priority, is getting that out for the end of the summer. I do, like I said, with the first book, I didn't want to write, a second one. I do kind of have one I'm thinking about working on, but it's more of a collaboration with a friend. So I'm not too at liberty to talk about it. And he would be more the author and I'd be kind of the researcher. There is something there. It's nice to have a depth chart of things to do. And you know what I mean?
So in the words of the great Canadian philosopher Justin Bieber, never say never.
Right.
Is what you're saying.
You know what? This whole project for me has just, I'm just heading into my 25th year of teaching. And for me, it's just been fun. It's been a release. It's been fun to have this to come home to and do a little research and go down little rabbit holes and find cool little interesting historical stories. It's more for me just kind of mentally healing. I'm open to things at this point, but I just kind of let myself go where the inspiration finds it. You know what I mean? Like if I find something, I want to go. I don't have to like force myself to do anything. You know what I mean?
I do. Again, the book is A Slapshot in Time, The Wild But True History of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. You can find it on Amazon. Dan Wenisota at Wenisota on the Twitter machine, joining this 120th edition of Minnesota Sports Chat. Before I let everybody know about my good friends at Beans Coffee Company, and then I hit you up with 5 filler questions on the way out the door. You've been talking about the North Stars, and one of my greatest pains in life, if people ask me, what team do I dislike the most? It's always the Dallas Stars. I don't like the Green Bay Packers, but I can kind of tolerate them. And I've said for years, it's mainly because it's really tough to despise the Packers when they have just literally 30 years of great quarterback play. And as a Vikings fan, you would love to have that. Mine is more not necessarily Packers players, it's Packers fans. Same with the Badgers. The Badgers are probably my second least favorite team. Okay? If you're a Minnesota kid, you go to Wisconsin, don't ever come back. Dead serious. I'm looking at you Lakeville grads that have done it too. Don't ever come back. We don't need you. Better dead than red. Okay, but the team that I despise the most is the Dallas Stars. And mainly 2 reasons. They leave, and then, of course, they win a Stanley Cup within a handful of years. And I'm not, you know me, I put way too much stock into uniforms. The Dallas Stars have desecrated once great uniforms. The Dallas Stars uniforms currently are an absolute abomination and should be buried in the deepest parts of the ocean, never to return. It's honestly one of the main reasons why I can't stand Dallas. The uniforms are hideous. They're ugly. How could you take such a great, beautiful uniform like the Minnesota North Stars and do what they've done? It's not even remotely the same green anymore, mind you. That's what drives me crazy.
Green.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. Who do you despise the most? Are the Stars
first
up
of
there?
all, on your desecrating the North Stars jersey, Norm Green actually did that before he left. So let's put that out there.
Okay.
For me personally, I can't stand the Packers, and I got to be careful here too, because I have some North Dakota State ties, and our rival is up in Grand Forks. But the forwarder of a writer of my book here, Lefty, went to UND, so I have to be very careful about what I say about.
Yeah, be careful there.
North Dakota up there now. So, but yeah, I just the Packers. I can't stand the smug look on Aaron Rodgers' face every time I see it. God, Packer fans.
Thoughts on the new Aaron Rodgers tattoo and gal? Any thoughts you want to weigh in with? What's her name? Meta Blue Earth or something?
I don't know. I don't. Good Lord, that guy. He's a wackadoodle at this point.
Yeah, he's got a new gal more often than I have a new job.
I'd still take him on the purple, though. I'll say that. If he wants to jump ship, he can come over.
Yeah, 2026, it'll probably happen.